And I think what's a really great opportunity for me is to be able to explain to you just how important the work I did with you has been. And I know that won't surprise you, because that's the reason you love the work you do.
Yes, I'm very passionate about it.
Yeah, it wouldn't really matter who you worked with. There were gains to be made. Wonderful opportunity to catch up with you again, and thank you for something that's been incredibly profound in my life. I mean, there are some funny moments of doing homework on an aeroplane in those days, very much in a pencil and paper, and I'm sure things have moved on in terms of the way that you test and the homework that you give. I hadn't had homework for a long time. Uh,
We
uh,
call it cognitive practice.
I still call it homework.
And
It felt like homework. But
I
I
hear
just,
you got interrupted. I hear you got interrupted on the plane by people saying, "What are you doing?"
yeah, I think on that particular flight that we're thinking of, the then treasurer of the country of Australia, Joe Hockey, was on it, and he was sitting in a nearby seat. He's like, Cassandra, what are you doing? I said, homework, brain gym exercises. I'm trying not to lose my cognitive faculties. And I wonder, furthermore, I know that there are some that are declining, but, is there any opportunity I can expand? And so for the purposes of today, I'd love to hear from you. First of all, what it is that you believe you do and how you describe it. I realize you've written a book recently,
Hmm.
and what's the power of it for people? What is the book about? And what is it that you do? Why did you write the book? And how does it help? Why does it matter?
So I'm a cognitive neuroscientist after having done a Master of Cognitive Science. And what that means, it's the way the brain processes information. And if you look at most of our education and training and coaching, we focus on the left hemisphere and language, which is one word after another, one sentence after another. So it's serial processing. And then what we do is after somebody's been through a learning or a coaching program, we ask them, well, what did you learn? And they feed back what they learned. And then it stops. What we're interested in is much more than just what you learned, but how have you been able to apply it to change your thinking and then to change your leadership behaviors? Because you can't change your leadership behaviors if you can't change your thinking. So most people don't realize that the conscious mind only processes about 5% of our information. It does it very slowly, serial processing. And there's been some research that shows it's a bit like the tip of the iceberg, the conscious mind, what we're aware of. But 95% of the information processed is under the brain's water, if you like. It's the deep part of the iceberg, and it's subconscious. So we're kind of semi-aware of it, but not really. And its language is shapes and diagrams and pictures and relationships, etc. So it doesn't talk in English or French there. But what it does is it observes the world, and this is where we create what I call the 10 subconscious thinking habits. So that's things like analytical thinking. So Cassandra, if I said to you, what's 4 times 4? What answer would you give me?
I know it to be 16.
Okay. So how did you bring that number forward?
Oh, part of it was incredibly diligent primary school teacher who made us do our times table and sing them incessantly. So for me, 4 squared, that's what it is. And I was taught it to be so before I thought about why it might be so. It was rote learning in those days.
And that rote learning was what I was looking at. So you repeated it over and over and memorized it. And 20 years later, you can still remember what it is. So you didn't have to think about it. You just recalled it and said, pulled it out of your knowledge database, here it is. Now, if I said to you, what's 16 times 17 divided by 15, how would you process that information?
There might be a slight moment of panic, thinking, oh, I don't know my 16 times tables that would take me beyond 17. So I don't, so I might start with the square root of 16, the square of 16, and then I might see, and then I might, but the whole processing for that would slow
Exactly.
right down. And
And the
I'd
good
have
news
to
is
yeah,
I'm
I'd
not
have to calm
actually
myself down first and go, just work it through. I'd think about, I would
so I'm not actually
much
looking.
slower.
Yeah. Well, what I'm looking at, I'm not actually looking for an answer, but what you said, I'd have to calm down and process it. So you would use what we call the analytical thinking. When we talk about fluid thinking, it's defined as the ability to solve new and novel problems that you haven't done before. In other words, you're in uncharted waters. So you hadn't committed that equation to rote. So you had to use your analytical thinking. And depending on what the games and hobbies and activities you did as a child, that drives how well your brain coded in the brain-computer program of analytical thinking. So some people programmed it in really strongly, so they're high quality, very quick. Other people, not so much. So when it comes to analytical thinking, they take a longer time to process and the quality's not quite as good. So what we want to do, what I'm passionate about, is that we have a fluid thinking diagnostic assessment. So it's a test. So, there's a lot of instruments around them. They say, do you want to be the head librarian or do you want to be the chief creative officer of an advertising agency? And part of you goes, yeah, well, that depends. And often you got blind spots. Whereas ours is just pictures and diagrams, and you have a certain amount of time to do it, and it gives us the quality and speed of each of these 10 subconscious things. And so when we're working with leaders, we get them to do the diagnostic instrument of those 10 subconscious thinking habits. We just do a gap analysis. So if you're right on the optimum, we don't need to do any work there. But if you're lower in focus thinking, there's a gap, then what tends to happen is you suffer from the shiny object syndrome. So whatever captures your attention takes your brain with it. And your brain goes there without even consciously wondering about, is what's distracting me more important than the priority I'm working on right now? Because unless your focus thinking is high to realize when you're being interrupted, you're literally outsourcing your priorities to whoever or whatever interrupts you, whether that's an email or a phone call, etc. And so then people wonder why they're not as productive as they could be. So the Economist magazine showed that people are distracted 28% of the time, and most people say, Phillip, and the rest, it's more like 50. So imagine being able to go from working at 70% productivity to about 90% product. That gets most of our clients at least an hour back in each day, and it keeps their leadership of their people focused and not jumping from one thing to another.
Can I just ask you there, do some organizations hear that differently and think, great, my people can be more productive. I'll have them work as long as they did before, but I'll get more out of them?
Well, that's the idea, because what's happening at the moment is when you get interrupted that much time, people are working longer and they're working harder. If you work long and hard all day, every day, it's like a car engine that's redlining, and you can't keep redlining a car engine or you'll blow it up. And that's my premise as to why people are suffering from burnout. So what I'm personally interested in is if I can get the same level of output or an even higher level of output for the companies in a shorter period of time, then that's a win for the individual, it's a win for the company, both from productivity and minimizing the burnout situation.
So I guess my cynical hat is saying, are you seeing organizations that are willing to allow someone to work more productively, more effectively for shorter, or do they say, oh, I'll keep the same amount of hours and just simply get more from someone? Like, I'd love to believe that organizations would be happy to see their people go home earlier.
No, it's more the latter. So to give you an example, with one client, they were working very long hours during the week, and they were also eating into a large chunk of their weekend, and it was starting to affect the family and personal relationship with their partner. Once they were able to work so much more productively, you don't need to work those long hours to produce it there. So they just made it's almost a personal choice, because the company's interested in what output you can produce. And if you can produce a great output in a shorter period of time, happy days. Because the longer you work during a day, the less you're actually getting into the mental drainage part, and something that towards the end of the day that should take you 100 units to do the work ends up taking it 200 units. So it's a win-win for both, but most of the companies leave it up to the individual, and they say, I'm not going to keep working late at night, and it's nice to have weekends with my partner and my family.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So I think you were also asking about the book. So
Yeah, was that, sometimes people say, I've got a book in me. You obviously had a book in you. Why did you have to write it?
Well, that's an interesting story, Cassandra. You know my good wife, Susan. I need to be careful of the language here.
Yes, because she will likely see this segment.
Yes, so shall I put it this way? She robustly encouraged me, and you can read between the lines there.
And
So
Susan,
without,
if she was on this call, why did she know you needed to do it?
she just said, "Look, you've got so much knowledge here, and we talk to executives and we ask them, is your brain your biggest asset? And they go, well, of course it is. And then we ask them, how does it work? And they go, well, I don't know, it just does what it does. And then we ask them, and how were you taught how to think and learn? Then I have a little bit of fun and I say, so you're a senior executive of a major company, you've told me your brain's your most important asset, but you don't know how it works and nobody's taught you how to use it properly. They kind of pause and go, I don't know, I would have expressed it that way, but it's hard to argue with your logic. So Susan said, you need to create a book in a way that people can relate so they understand how their brain works. The structure we worked out was, let's give some introductory science, cognitive science to it, because for those that want to know a bit of that, that's there. But the part that people talk to me about most are the relatable stories. So I was talking about focused thinking before. In the book, we talk about Bianca the bumblebee. So we've all seen them. They flit around from person to person, da 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 da. Yeah, but what have you achieved? And it's not a lot. And then they have to stay back and try and do it or come in early in the morning. It's not a way to work. And the thing is, Bianca was told, you need to be more focused. And she said, Phillip, I'd love to be more focused, but my brain doesn't work that way. And that's what we're talking about. If you can't consciously and willpower change your thinking and leadership behavior, it's telling you it's a subconscious thinking habit that's causing it. And if you want to get more focused, you have to go through the cognitive exercises to increase your focused thinking. And then all of a sudden, you won't be flittering around all over the place. You'll be able to focus. And the other thing that happens is, you might have to deliver a report in 3 weeks and you could start on it now, but they need the stress of the impending deadline. So a day or two before it's due, they're working the hero hours, which impacts the quality. They don't miss a deadline, but it's not going to give them, and you're just working under the stress conditions. So Susan was encouraging me to say, well, look, if you could do that for each of the 10 subconscious thinking habits and give them more context, then people would be able to understand more about this. Otherwise, it's something we're doing uniquely, and it's what gives people the understanding.
Absolutely. And a follow on from that would be and I obviously know some of this because of the book and your teaching, but can you have a blend of subconscious thinking? Can you be a little bit this and a little bit that, or is there one dominant?
No, it's actually 10 dimensions of it. Normally what happens is we kind of summarize what the strengths are. We use the traffic lights and that's the green. And those ones, well, people already know how to do that. So there's no point working on them. And then we have a couple of other ones, where there might be a moderate amount of development needed or a large amount of development needed. So we take the results of the diagnostic and that drives how we tailor the program. So there's some things that a lot of people have in common, like, lower focus thinking. I think it's about 85% of people, and lower or moderate personal strategic thinking, which is very different than corporate strategy. So personal strategic thinking is, I'm approaching a new thing I've never done before. How do I create a path forward for the team with the real emphasis on getting maximum leverage? So I really encourage and share the story of the real role of the conductor, which is to create really high quality music, yet ironically, they don't play one single note. So if a leader can get themselves to that stage and they're leading the thinking of others to create all of this, imagine the leverage and multiplier effect they can have with their team and their people.
Well, I feel very strongly about the conductor analogy myself. I just wrote a piece recently on conducting in the boardroom because, as you know, at the conductor level, almost entirely, the person in that position is absolutely excellent and exceptional at a particular instrument or instruments, but usually a particular instrument. But they choose at some point in their career to focus entirely or more on the conducting role because there's something that calls them to
Yes.
that particular role. And I think that is thus, whether it's a CEO or a board chair, for example, indeed you may be expert at some underlying part of the business or have some technical capability, but for some reason, hopefully, you learn some other skills so that if you do go into the CEO or chair role, you are extremely effective at what's required. I think what I'm seeing, though, and what I'm keen to delve more into with you is there are far too many leaders who become ultimately responsible for a P&L, for a division, for the overall entity, for chair boards, who have simply not developed those conducting skills. Is there anything you would pick that up in your diagnostics? Could you look at someone and go, look, you're just not, I know that you might aspire to be that, but these are the things you'd need to work on to be that?
Sure. So a couple of giveaways. So building on your analogy there, so it was head of strings. So you've got that, and you're been through the chief violinist, etc., and you've got that so well grounded in. You're doing it without thinking, and that's what we want leaders to do this type of activity and thinking happening automatically below the subconscious. Now, what happens is that when somebody develops a really strong domain expertise, they generally have high operational thinking. So they can roll up their sleeves, they can get into it, they know it inside out. And you think about what happens with promotions in your middle career. It's the go-to person. So you get asked, the old saying, if you want something done, give it to a busy person. And then they put on their Superwoman outfit or their Superman outfit and leap over buildings in a single bound, and they get outcomes through extraordinary personal work. And then they get promoted and promoted and promoted. And then if the head of strings thinks about going to conductor, then that deep domain knowledge is actually an inhibitor, because now you have to go across the whole of the orchestra. So it's Alvin Toffler's future shock. The future belongs to those that will learn, unlearn, and relearn. So that person had to unlearn the domain knowledge. In other words, just, still know how to play the instrument, but they needed to learn, how do I lead all of the orchestra? And that's what we call the personal strategic thinking. So in that situation, we need to put a lot of development into that, and that's what most organizations need. And also what you find, and you might laugh at this one, the person with lower strategic thinking and moderate abstract thinking, which we use for planning and delegation, and really high operational thinking, they're the sort of person that says, Philip, by the time I explained to somebody else what to do, I could have done it 3 times over. I go, you know what? I agree with you 100%. But all you're doing is locking yourself into the level you're at now. You're the one putting the ceiling there, not anybody else. Because until your brain learns how to step back, forward think through things in the mind, and then communicate and delegate effectively, you're never going to get any leverage, and you're never going to be able to lead horizontally. And that's why a lot of people hit the Peter principle. Fantastic here, the best salesperson, let's turn them into the sales manager. Well, it'd be a good idea to have a look at their fluid thinking profile before you did that, because that's what causes the Peter principle of being promoted one level beyond the competence. It's not the technical skill, it's the thinking and thought leadership and people skills that allows them to...
2013 or some such. My memory, and as you know, we can have false memories, but I remember that being a period of time. I was leading a company at the time, Pottinger. I'd created it, and it needed more from me. But I believed it needed more from me. Come out of a period of being, really regarded for being analytical and really regarded for negotiation. But now I was a leader, and I had been for a period of time. But, you know, the environment was more complicated, the business needed to grow, and somehow I felt I wasn't fit for the task. I wasn't quite where I needed to be. And I remember having you sitting in our boardroom, and I couldn't enunciate to you what wasn't there yet or where I wasn't, but I just knew there were things I needed to work on. I'd heard of your work, and I thought, I think this idea of working with my cognitive thinking, working where I'm at, and the belief that your brain is able to be trained means that I don't have to despair, and I don't have to be less than what I want, and maybe I can change. And I seem to remember you were both very compassionate, but not, you know, you're not gentle for the sake of it, but you can also be quite forceful. And, you know, I'm happy for you to share your recollections of what you found that day in the room, even if I can't remember what year it was. But yes, that's my reason. I think that was the genesis of why I just knew I needed to meet Phillip Campbell.
Yeah, I do remember that conversation that we had in the boardroom, and I'll just sort of give a bit of background context there. You were already very good at what you did, and we tend to work with people that are very good at what they do, and they got that way because they're always looking to be better. And I remember you, I'm paraphrasing here, but Phillip, I've had a good career so far. I'm really happy with it. But I know I'm going to have to do something and different. I'm going to have to think differently. I'm going to have to lead differently to achieve the next phase. But I don't quite know how to do that. So that's where we were. And you were very open and honest, and that took a lot of courage. And often what happens with entrepreneurs, they'll grow very quickly. But the thinking that got you to here is not the thinking that you need to get up to here. So what we talked about was we had a look at your fluid thinking diagnostic, and I remember us talking about, you know, priorities and how do I stay focused and how do I set them, etc. And I had to explain to you that your conceptual thinking, you know, that connecting the dots, and you probably were half finishing people's sentences for them, etc. And so you had the ability to quickly set priorities. But what brought you undone was your focused thinking was only moderate. So if somebody came along or something popped out that caught your attention, you were dragged off the priority you're working on, and you weren't even aware of it. So I might come and say, Cassandra, can I have 5 minutes of your time? And you go, sure, Phillip. And we all know that's about an hour. And an hour later, and you've got something, a deadline to finish, you're an hour behind. And so what we worked on first off was getting your focused thinking up. So if somebody did interrupt you, or an email or whatever, you then became consciously aware of it, and then you made the choice. Do I talk to Phillip for a little bit? Or do I say, what's it about? Get some context. And look, sorry, Phillip, I'm just working on this. Can we pick it up tomorrow afternoon? And I'd go, sure, I just wanted to bring it to your attention. But we think because somebody interrupts us, it has to be dealt with immediately and urgently. So once we did that, was a real game changer for you, because you were able to keep focusing on the highest priorities. And then you had a good level of analytical thinking. And what we did is we worked on that to make it even better. So what that allowed you to do was to define problems even quicker, because you would have been good at defining problems, but you probably had to mull over it, and you're kind of going, come on, Cassandra, come on, brain, work quicker for me. And by doing that, we're able to get you to define it quicker. And then you'd be a very good problem solver, because you're a very innovative thinker. You love brainstorming solutions. And then there might be half a dozen different solutions. And with your high conceptual thinking, you go, the answer's number 3. And then people say, why do you say that, Cassandra? And your conscious mind is trying to work out why your subconscious brain that processes things much quicker was able to come up with that correct answer. And then the next area we worked on was, again, you had a moderate level of strategic thinking, But again, it just meant that it could be improved and it took you a bit longer. So we did activities there which forced your brain, instead of jumping into things too quickly, it forced you to take your first step, which was backwards, not let's just jump in and do it. Because it's only when your brain steps backwards and gathers all the information on that previous problem solving area that it can then really work out, well, how am I going to create a path for my team and myself in this new area which we've never done before? How am I going to do that? And so by getting your strategic thinking up, you were not only able to better create that path, but you were better able to communicate it. So I think we had a conversation at one stage to say, if the clearest way to say something is A, B, C, D, your brain, because it was going so quickly, would go D, B, C, A. So all the components were there, but you put a heavier cognitive load. So once you got that, you were able to communicate more clearly. And then we did a little bit of work on your abstract thinking, which is kind of thinking through things in the mind. And that's what we use to plan out who's going to do what when, but really importantly in delegating. And too often we find when people delegate, they kind of give a directive with minimal information because your brain's already off to the next thing you have to do. And so the ability to kind of make sure you think through how you're going to delegate got you much more leverage, because we were trying to pull you out of all of that great work you've done with all that analytical experience, but that's not where you were going to add most value going forward, and that was going to inhibit you growing the company.
It's so true. I remember those exercises where you'd say to me, I now need you to go and, what are the instructions for this? And I'm like, but that person doesn't have this. You just said, what are the instructions for this? And I remember thinking that was difficult. We all talk about the power of delegation and you need to be able to delegate and just delegate that. And yes, we know that's notionally an optimal thing to do, but not if you don't delegate well, not if you don't have your own way of being able to digest and synthesize information and put yourself in the shoes of the other.
Exactly. Yeah. And
delegate in a way that they will understand.
Yes.
And take away that self-righteousness or the frustration that comes with why can't they just keep up? That's actually not where another person's at, and that's actually not on them. It's on you to delegate better and effectively. And so for me, I remember that being complicated and a game changer. I think there are a couple of things in there that, on reflection, when I was thanking you recently, you were very effective, because there are some things that I do so much better now, but I don't get exhausted. I have to stop to remember I didn't used to do it that well. Moderate sounds great, unless of course you're like me, where moderate is just abject failure, right? Like unless I'm excellent on, if the report card says moderate, I don't want to go home and show mum.
Not that you have any perfectionist tendencies.
But if I sort of look at that, now there are some things I do where I do, and I sit there and I think about you and think, wow, I'm not sure that younger Cassandra was at that place. And it wasn't something that one day you wake up and because we're not doing we're not conscious necessarily that we're doing some of the better thinking and acting styles that you would desire for us until sometimes a decade later or, years later, when you're in a circumstance, when you realize the cognitive load that it took to do that, or the way that the person responded, you're obviously doing that skill quite well. So again, an enormous thank you. And that's why I wanted, again, to talk to you today, because there's just so much to be gained for the individual, for the organization, and for society and humanity at large, if we can really encourage people to develop themselves, be courageous enough to put their hand up and say, for a fact, I know that I am not going to rate excellent, or nothing to be seen here, nothing to be done across every axis. That's just not, I would love to know if you've met someone like that just is off the charts on everything. So there is opportunity.
Absolutely. And And there's a couple of reflections I'll make on what you were just saying, but in that answer to the question, we haven't met anybody who got everything at the optimum level at the first cut pass. We've got people that have got optimum everything after the program. But the reason for that is, again, what we're measuring is how well you coded your brain habits when you were a young child, and you weren't doing that with any intention. So, but a couple of reflections on what you were saying, that when we provide our report, we have a page where we say, we want you to think forward to a time when you've completed the program, and what outcomes do you want to achieve, and what behaviors do you want to have changed? And that might be, well, I'm very distractible now and I want to be focused, or, you know, I'm a bit slower at the analytical thinking and I'd like to do that quickly and easily. And also the other benefit is it's less mental energy, so you don't end up as tired at the end of it. But it was interesting what you were saying there, or sorry, I'll come back to that. So we had one client, and they put a breakfast on for us in New York, and we invited a number of different parties, and they shared their experience. And one of the people sort of brought out you remember the one page of what outcomes you want to achieve. And they said, it's really funny because I was asked to come and talk about this, and I did the outcome page, and then I just put it in the drawer, and I haven't looked at it for since. And it was, 3 or 4 months ago. And he said, I pulled it out, and I read through everything, and I achieved everything I put down. He said, the most stunning thing is that's my new normal. And I explained, yes, because it's a subconscious thinking about. If you have to think about it, it's not subconscious there. So he was really amazed because he didn't realize, although we did it over 2 or 3 months period, he was getting such a strong change that it just felt normal and natural. And the other one, when it comes to delegation, we had one client, and I said, how does your delegation go? So I get about half the quality I want, and it takes them about twice as long. I said, and what happens when they give you the work? He says, I have to stay back and work and figure it all out, etc. And I said, you'd be great to work for. I said, why is that? And I said, well, I can do a not so good job knowing you're going to pull the rabbit out of the hat. And it was like somebody had gone, the Homer doll. And so we took him through a process of delegating cognitively. As you say, it's got to be different to the capability of each of the persons. And so there was a major thing, and he said, this is going to take me 20 minutes to prepare for. I said, well, just give it a go. So they did it, and they came back the next week. And I said, how'd it go? He says, you've created a real problem. I'm sort of getting very concerned. And I said, so what happened? He said, well, I took the 20 minutes, I really prepared for it, and I gave them the background, the context, and da-da-da-da-da. And they did a better job than I could do in half the time. I said, so what's the problem? He said, now I need to find more 20 minutes so I can prepare the delegation properly. So it really does make a difference. And he also had a good sense of humor, because he said, the most amazing thing about your program, Phillip? I said, what's that? He said, it's amazing how much more intelligent my people have become since I did the program, because he was able to get much more leverage off their thinking, which is what we want. He was much more strategic as a leader, a much better communicator, much better delegator, and he could pull himself out of the weeds, and people found him a much better leader because he was much clearer in what he wanted them to do. So it makes a huge difference. And often, as I say, people don't realize how much they've changed. But what we do is we actually get them to record their behavioral changes at the end of each week's session, so that we can show them and they go, wow, I have achieved a lot from there. But that's the thing, as I say, it's the subconscious, so it's a new normal.
So tell me the good news or the bad news. I haven't worked with you one-on-one since that time. Obviously, believe I locked certain things in and practice. How bad's the atrophy? Like, how much of it sticks?
Well, basically what we do is build it so it all sticks, because if we've improved your ability to focus, you don't want to go back to the old world there and be like Bianca the bumblebee. So we build the habits into the way you work. We build the habits into the way you strategically think and how you get really clear if you're doing a big project. What are the key aspects of this? Because I need to go and discuss them with all the stakeholders before I go working out a strategy and a plan. Because I've had situations where clients have told me before we work with them, they got 90% of the way through and they thought, oh, I'll just go and talk to this stakeholder. And the stakeholder says, that'll never work because of this, this, and this. So we have a methodology that you continue to use, which keeps you on track and you get better and better at it.
You mentioned something before about what gets locked in. They were not your words, but effectively, I think you were suggesting something that gets locked in and or learned, or a style that from childhood. Was I correct in hearing that?
Yeah, so what I basically say to people is the brain you have today is a happy accident because the subconscious thinking habit of, say, analytical thinking. So it's the ability to take complexity, break it down, and then resynthesize it. So if a child did a lot of drawing, you have to take the object. You can't draw the whole object. You have to draw parts of the object, and you have to give frames of reference around it. So if they did lots of drawing and they got quite good at it, then that would indicate that they would have a very strong analytical thinking capability there. So that's what I meant. But if a child didn't do a lot of drawing or things that required analysing, then they're probably going to have only a lower, moderately well-written, well-coded computer brain habit of analytical thinking.
Well, I just wonder if I got some of mine from climbing trees and building forts and out of anything I could and trying to figure out structurally how I'd get up that tree and not need rescuing, and how I would hold that fort up with the furniture that was in the house and put it all back before Mum and Dad realised that I'd upended it.
Well, it is interesting you mentioned that, because if you think of climbing up a tree, it's much better to mentally work out your path and how you're going to get from branch to branch and go to here, and then you find, oh, that one's too high, and I've just come from that, and that's going to be hard to jump down to, and you're stuck in place between a rock and a hard place. And so you would be mentally analysing and abstract thinking through, so you would have climbed the tree mentally before you actually climbed it, and that's what we're
I also descended the tree before I climbed it in my head.
No,
For me, I remember thinking, I didn't know the language for different muscle groups, in that, but I knew that going up isn't actually the same as coming down. So
absolutely. So you mentally, and that's what we want executives to do, because it's very much quicker to use your mental faculties to play that forward and play it back and make changes and see where risks are, than to do it by discovery when you've gone down a rabbit hole and you find you have to do a whole lot of rework. And then with you building the forts, you have to conceptualize what the fort looks like. You have to analyze what parts have I got. You have to strategically think, well, how am I going to build it so it doesn't fall apart? So anywhere where you had to create something from nothing, and you didn't have instruction. Because if you're doing the IKEA way of doing it, it's just raising your pattern recognition there. If you start from nothing as a child and you've got to mentally create it and build it and then deconstruct it before Mum and Dad got home, that's a much better way of building up these subconscious thinking habits as a child.
Is there any role in families that, the role that a child has in a family? They might be the only child, they might be the peacekeeper, they might be the one that gets away with everything, because, the brother before already did it, or they might be, are there any of those that impact, or not really? They're sort of more belief.
They're more going to impact personality types. So we're dealing with the cognitive information processing, not so much the personality. However, I would say if you can get children playing interactive games, something like Monopoly, because you have to analyze, do I trade off or don't I trade off? And who's got what? And if I can swap that with that and that. So you have to have a strategy as to where you're going to build up, etc. So games that are interactive like that are very helpful in terms of building up the capability for the kids.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Well, is there anything that you feel that I should have asked you today that you'd want to share with people?
That's a really interesting question there, Cassandra. Well done.
I'm delegating responsibility to you.
Well done. Look, I think the thing is that people don't truly understand the power of neuroplasticity. Um, and what happens with fluid thinking is it kind of increases at young adulthood at its highest, and then as we get older, which you've kind of alluded to, we get less and less flexible and adaptable and agile until we get to such an old age that any sort of change is really quite annoying. And the really elderly like to stay in the routine because their fluid thinking's gone down. So we've had people that were at the twilight of their career, and they'd quietly whisper to me, "Philip, can you really teach an old dog new tricks?" And I say to them, it's this simple. If you follow our guidelines, if you do the practice 3 times a week, then you will rewire your brain and change your thinking habits. And it's kind of, it's like a flash. It's one of the things I enjoy. It's like a flash of light, and it's kind of, really? And I said, yeah, just do it. And once they get there, they kind of get there and they say, wow, if I hadn't have done it, I wouldn't have believed it. And the other thing is we work with a major consulting company here in New York, as you know, and we're brought in by the managing partner and head of HR. And they had a very interesting philosophy. They said, if you can improve our thinking skills 5 or 10%, means we can run our organization better. But more importantly, we can give much better service and advice to our clients. And we've been working with them for 10 years now. So it shows you the effectiveness to be doing this with a whole lot of people over that period of time.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to close out on something you just reminded me very strongly of something that I said back to you. We'd done the discussion, we'd done the assessment, we discussed the results, and you said, if you just trust me, follow the process,
Yep.
3 times a week, work through the skills that I set you, the tasks, you will excel on all of these areas. And I just said, I just don't think I can afford the time.
Yep.
And you looked straight in the eyes and you said, Cassandra, you can't afford not to.
Exactly.
That's what you can't afford. And I sat there, and in that moment, I realized I needed to trust you.
Yep.
I believed you.
Yep.
But I needed to trust you to follow the process, because you were quite right. I could not afford not to invest the time. And so I want to thank you so very much for those very wise words all those years ago, and for what I truly do believe is a much superior outcome for me, a much superior outcome for the people I spend my time with and assist or advise or lead. And I'm really very thankful, and I hope many more people will avail themselves of your skills. And where can they find you? Where are they best to find you?
Okay, so a couple of things. I'll just reflect on that one last comment.
Okay.
Most people find that they get an hour back in each day after being only halfway through the program. That's a huge return on time investment. Plus, we try to get them to do these exercises first thing in the morning because it gets their brain fired and they're much more productive there. So it really, the return and payoff is quite quick. Now, in terms of finding me, you can find me at enigmaFIT.com. So we're about the enigma of the brain and then being fit, so enigmaFIT.com. And you can also find me on LinkedIn, Phillip Campbell, CEO of enigmaFIT. And you can reach out to me on either of those avenues.
Wonderful. Well, look, thank you so very much, Philip. It really has been a privilege and an honor to know you, and now be able to call you a friend. I look forward to more cocktails and hopefully lack of cognitive decline as a result. I know that we both share a love for gin and tonic, but thank you so very much. It means a great deal, and I hope that more people will invest in their leadership through investing in their in their brains and cognitive processing. So a
And
big thank you from me to you.
and thank you, Cassandra. It was a joy to work with you because I enjoyed your skepticism, which is different than cynicism, because skepticism says, I'll check it out. And you had the courage to get in there and do it. And as you know about yourself, well, once you commit, you commit. And you committed really strongly, and you got a lot of strong payoffs, which helped you grow your business and turned you into the excellent leader you are now. So it was a pleasure to work with you, and I look forward to catching up with you the next time.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks, Cassandra. Bye
Bye.
now.